Blog Talk Radio.
And good evening, everybody, and thank you for joining us. Sorry about the technical problems and sorry for being late. This is King Jordanton, and tonight we're going to be joined with Beth Karas. We're going to be joined with Alex Sanchez, defense attorney, and Joseph Scott Morgan. Okay, we're going to go over some trials. We're going to ask the question, why did James Holmes, in fact, not get the death penalty? And one of the people that have been following the case from the get-go, let's bring in an icon in the field of the world and news. She worked with CNN. She has currently her own website, which you could catch at karasoncrime.com. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Miss Beth Karas. Good evening, Beth, and welcome back to King Jordan Radio. How are you?
Good evening, Jordan. I'm just fine. Thank you for having me.
Okay, it's my pleasure. Let's bring in, you see him sometimes on Nancy Grace. You see him on CNN. He's a New York City defense attorney. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. Alex Sanchez. Good evening, Alex, and welcome to King Jordan Radio.
Jordan, how are you? And hello to Beth and hello to Joe. It's great to be on the same show with very professional colleagues like this. So it's looking forward to the next hour or so.
Okay, let's bring in HLM and forensics. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Joseph Scott Morgan. Good evening, Joseph, and welcome back to King Jordan Radio. How are you?
Howdy, Jordan. How are you guys this evening? Great to be on with you all.
Okay, let me start with Beth. And Beth, you have followed the trial of James Holmes, the movie theater shooting trial. And the million-dollar question people want to know is, why do you, in your opinion, and we'll go around the panel, of course, think that he did not get the death penalty?
Well, the jury didn't deliberate very long, Jordan. They deliberated about 2 days, day and a half, 2 days, before saying, we're not going to be unanimous. We understand, Your Honor, you're going to give him life without parole, which, by the way, starts next Monday. Should be a 3-day sentencing hearing because there'll be a lot of victim impact statements made, and there are so many victims. But jurors, they knew the alternative sentence was life without parole, and they later on said, or a couple of them spoke, the breakdown was 9 for death, 2 were on the fence. With a little more deliberation, probably, this is me saying, probably they could have gone over to the death side. But there was one woman, there were 9 women on the jury, one of them was adamant that she would never vote for death and nothing was going to change her mind. And they're like, you know what, it's Friday afternoon, we're done. We're finished. We've been sitting, jury selection started at the end of January. They started hearing opening statements, testimony on April 27th. This was August 7th. They were done. So they said, Your Honor, we are not unanimous. This is reading from the verdict sheet. We understand you will give him a life without parole sentence. The breakdown we learned later. The defense hammered home the main mitigator. But for his mental illness, James Holmes would never have committed this tragedy. But for his mental illness. And it worked with that one juror, who, by the way, has not said her reason for it, but I can't believe it would be anything but that, his mental illness.
Unbelievable. Alex Sanchez, a criminal defense attorney, what's your take on why Holmes did not get the death penalty?
Well, the simple reason is that one juror refused to go along with everybody else. And in our system of justice, first you have the trial to determine if he was guilty or not guilty, and they found him guilty. And then you have a second trial. And the second trial is to determine whether or not he should get the death penalty, and that has to be unanimous. And in this case, it wasn't unanimous. There was one person who refused to go along with this. And I understand the family is very enraged at this one juror, basically accusing the juror of intentionally sneaking onto the jury for the purposes of voting, against the death penalty. And I don't know what evidence they have about that, but that's the accusation they're making. But, either you agree and we have a system of justice or you don't agree with it. This is our system of justice. One person determined they didn't want to vote the death penalty, and there's no death penalty. And that really should be the end of the story.
Alex,
interesting.
Alex, can I just ask Alex a question? Because I hadn't heard that there were these accusations that the juror was a stealth. I mean, that's maybe the case in Jodi Arias, but here you had so many families, right? 12 dead and 70 other victims, but the death penalty was for the 12 dead. But some of those families didn't want the state to seek the death penalty, and some did. So I don't know which family was upset with that juror. Maybe it was one of the families too. I hadn't read that. I'm not saying that it didn't happen. I just hadn't read that.
Well, my latest reading was that some of the relatives of one of the persons that died, who wanted the death penalty, was enraged, and it's understandable. I mean, if you had a relative that was mowed down in a movie theater, you might want the death penalty.
And he planned it for. And he planned it for so long. It was just such an evil act, It was such an evil act.
Unbelievable. Joseph, what's your take?
Coming from the perspective of as an investigator, there's kind of an old adage that we would apply, having worked for the ME in Atlanta as a senior investigator there with the ME, and then prior to that with a coroner in New Orleans. We would say this tongue-in-cheek. It's kind of gallows humor, but we would say the more egregious the crime, the more shocking that it is to the senses, the higher the likelihood is that somebody's going to walk. People that enter onto a jury, they're going to look at this and say, there is some kind of mental deficit here relative to this individual. There's some kind of pathology that's going on. Who else in their right mind would go in and just wipe out these people that, just are like you and I, that go into a movie theater. Kind of on a little aside, I've been dying to go see the new, Mission Impossible movie. I never miss a single one of them. Well, my wife has not allowed us to go. The first week it came out, I was all set to go, and she says, no, somebody will come in the theater and kill us. And I was like, oh, my God, really? Is that what you think? Now this has kind of taken root, and for us in investigations, anytime that we see somebody that just goes off beam here and begins to, just randomly kill all these people, it's kind of amazing. But, you guys spoke to something, and Beth said this just a second ago. There was planning that went into this, and this was not just kind of a randomized act, which for me, and it's my 2 cents worth, is not the actions of somebody that is completely and totally unbalanced. If you're planning something, you're not that mentally debilitated to that point. But the court saw the defense did a fantastic job. They saved his life, and I don't know that anybody can cast aspersions on the defense attorneys in this case. And agreeably, I'd be rather miffed as the man that came to the microphone in the interview, that his family member had been killed. He was visibly angry and shaken by that.
But there's something, I'm sorry, Jordan, I just want to ask one more question. There's something that really troubles me, that when you get to this stage in a case, the prosecutor has to convince 12 people. Well, it's any time. The prosecutor has to convince 12 people, and the defense just has to convince one. Now, one gets a hung jury in a retrial at the guilt phase, right? But here, a non-unanimous verdict, because they call it a verdict, even though it's not unanimous, it defaults to a life sentence, and it's, like 9, probably 11 would have gone for death, just like in Jodi Arias. But one person can change it all. The defense just has to play to one person. I don't know, it just seems to be unfair, but it's the way the system works. It seems right. There are some states that have non-unanimous verdicts, Louisiana and Oregon, for certain crimes. 10-2, 11-1, that's a verdict.
And I was going to say, Beth, that's why picking a jury is so important to a case, because, when you're picking a jury in a case like this, you're picking for two reasons. One is maybe you think you have a legitimate defense and you could beat the case in its entirety, but you're really, in a case like this, you're really picking a jury, and you want to try to get people on that jury who you think are not going to vote for the death penalty if, in fact, the guy's convicted. That's simply the game plan by the defense attorneys. And you know what? They succeeded. Prosecutors are doing the same thing, by the way. They're trying to get people on the jury who they think are going to vote for the death penalty. So it's not like, defense is doing something underhanded. But in this case, the defense won.
Yeah.
And, Beth, did you catch that one woman who had an outburst during closing arguments, basically siding with James Holmes and basically screaming, and I believe she got 3 weeks in the jail. Did you see that?
Well, I watched the video. I wasn't in the courtroom. So, I saw it, and I watched the replay of it, and I saw the contempt hearing that was held once the judge had cleared, the courtroom and the jury, and the judge didn't draw any attention to her when it happened and the jury was in the box. She drew enough attention to herself, and the judge was not going to distract the proceedings further. She was escorted out, and the summation continued, and it was George Brockler, the prosecutor, who was summing up. This was a woman, as you just said, who was very much in Holmes's camp. She seemed a little unstable. They're kind of watching her in the courthouse, and she hadn't been there the entire trial. Anyway, she had that outburst, and as she was hauled off after the contempt hearing and given a 3-week sentence, she said, you're all going to kill her as you give them the death penalty. You're all going to be killers, something like that. Yeah, it was pretty shocking. You don't have outbursts too often in a courtroom like that from the public gallery.
Do you remember the outburst in the Casey Anthony trial? There was this one young man who flipped the bird. And
he didn't speak. He was just flipping the bird, and it was caught on camera. It was when Jeff Ashton was speaking. Jeff Ashton's back was to him. Ashton was at the podium. And a camera that was sort of trained on Ashton and picked up the public gallery sitting behind him caught this young man, 20-something young man, sort of flipping the bird with his middle finger up against his face. Or I think that's what it was. And the judge looked at the video and had a hearing. I think he gave him like 3 days. This judge put a couple people in, a juror who, potential juror during jury selection in Clearwater, who didn't show up after lunch or something. I remember he put him in too for a day or two. He was no nonsense, Melvin Perry.
Yeah, he's since retired. But let me go over to Alex Sanchez. What's your take on the MCStay trial? They tried to dismiss this. Obviously, that didn't work. What's your take on this trial?
That particular case, to me, from the facts that I've read, is one of the most horrific cases I've ever heard. But, of course, every time you read about a horrific case, there's a more horrific case somewhere else. But this case is bad news. This guy was supposedly a business partner, and there was some dispute over money, and he allegedly, kidnaps the family and then beats them to death, including 2 kids. Now, I'm a defense lawyer, but I got news for you. Just because I'm a defense lawyer does not necessarily mean that I'm against the death penalty. Now, I happen to have been against the death penalty for Holmes because I think the guy was clearly a crackpot. And I don't think the death penalty was designed for people that are crackpots. Guy's a nut. He had a history of being a nut. But this guy, MCStay, this guy's evil. And if anybody deserves to get the death penalty, it should be him. Now, I hope he gets a great trial. It should have good trial lawyers. The evidence should be challenged. They should be calling forensic specialists like Joe to possibly testify for the defense. But if the evidence is overwhelming and he did it, I would not cry if he was sentenced to death.
Wow. Let me go to you on this. What's your take?
From a forensic standpoint, there is just a dearth of potential evidence here. Of course, there was a significant lag in time. I think that's going to be one of the most difficult things to overcome. The family went missing in 10. They were discovered until 13 in the Mojave Desert. When bodies are placed in that type of environment like this family was found in, there is, some people would argue that, well, there's a high likelihood that kind of a natural mummification would take place. That's not going to be the case with this. The forensic evidence as far as trace evidence and those sorts of things is greatly diminished. A lot of this is going to come down to the instrument that he used. As Alec just this whole family was bludgeoned to death. This gentleman used a sledgehammer to facilitate this crime. With this having occurred, you're going to have multiple depressed fractures about the skull of both these people. And I think probably one of the most striking things, no pun intended, about this case that's really going to tug at the heartstrings of anybody that's impaneled on this jury is going to be the death of these children. I'm not saying that he's justified in killing the father of the family, but when you go and you take a family, an entire family, and kill them, this is very, very compelling. And the forensic pathologist and the other forensic specialists that are going to be on there, they're going to be able to paint a very, very graphic picture in this case. It's going to be hard to overcome the evidence in this case. And the watchword here is just gratuitous. It's absolutely gratuitous.
Beth Karas, your take on this trial?
Well, I do think that there's more to the story. Although I think Charles Merritt is absolutely involved, there may be more people. I don't know the evidence really well. I have the preliminary hearing transcript, which I've read most of. It's available is it on my website? It will be on my website. But there are cell tower evidence showing Charles Merritt, he's the defendant, MCStay's the family that was killed, Merritt's cell phone going off in the vicinity where the bodies were found, close in time to when they disappeared, within a couple of days of their disappearance, which was February 4th, 2010. They're found November 11th, 2013. And San Diego County Sheriff's Department had the case, but they were found in San Bernardino County. So now San Bernardino has a case. San Diego obviously gave it up once the bodies were found there. I guess both counties theoretically had jurisdiction, but the prosecution can only take place in one. I do believe the authorities think that they were killed in their home, which is in a town called Fallbrook in San Diego County. But we don't know everything they found in the home. The house was being renovated. And there's some evidence that maybe they were bludgeoned in the home and it was painted over, but the authorities haven't released. They've released the search warrants and the supporting affidavits, and you can see over a year or so how they were piecing the case together. They talked to Merritt within about 2 weeks. The family wasn't even reported missing until February 15th. Right, they were last seen on February 4th. They weren't reported missing until the 15th. The police were talking to Merritt by the 17th. He denied ever driving the MCStay family car, an Isuzu Trooper, something like that. The car was found abandoned at the Mexico border, which is why people thought that maybe they fled to Mexico and there was some sort of underhanded business deal or something. Well, he said he never drove the car, and his DNA has been found on the steering wheel, and I think the shift. He says he sat in it 6 weeks prior as a passenger, but his DNA is on the steering wheel. Anyway, I don't know how much DNA it is, if it could be possibly transfer DNA or something, or if it's really evidence that he gripped the steering wheel and abandoned the car at some point. I don't know. So we just don't know everything they have in this case. But assuming Merritt did this, and he does have a criminal record, nothing violent, but he's got a criminal record, it is pretty horrendous. And, of course, they're seeking the death penalty, and California has 751 inmates on death row, and I don't think they've executed anyone for,
really?
I don't know, since 2006 maybe?
Yeah, it's
really?
Yeah.
Through the death penalty in California is kind of a waste of time. As far as expediency goes. Back to the evidence, this evidence that's found within the vehicle, what would be very compelling is this idea that if there's touch DNA where it's transferred from his hand to the steering wheel and to the shift lever, that's good for placement. I think that one other thing I hope that was checked for, and of course we don't know at this point, would be any kind of latent prints that might be in this area too, because those will demonstrate more contact. The attorneys will have all manner of ways to say, well, yeah, he said he was in the vehicle. Maybe he just briefly touched the steering wheel or the gift lever while he was waiting for the other man to get into the vehicle, and that could be explained away. But if you can have a latent print that is found there and placed in the position on the steering wheel or the gift lever, the gear lever, that's going to be, that's going to be much more compelling.
Okay, Alex Sanchez, the next trial that I think it's deliberations as we speak is the Randall West Kerrick trial. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, this is the case with the police officer that shot this fellow. Yeah. I looked at, and this is on videotape. And I looked at that videotape, and I'm trying to understand what happened. From what I hear from the prosecution, they have suggested that this guy, the guy who was killed, had gotten into some type of an accident, a car accident, and seeking some assistance, and that somehow he encountered the police. But what's very, very strange about this case is that on video, he basically starts charging the police. And that's very bizarre conduct for somebody to engage in. And let me tell you something. I don't defend police. I don't defend. Listen, I have brought charges, or I've brought cases to the district attorney to have police officers brought up on charges. I have sued police officers, and I have police officers on the witness stand all the time. But I'm not looking to see a police officer get convicted of an offense if it doesn't merit it. And this guy on that videotape suddenly starts charging at the cop.
Yep.
It seemed insane. What is the cop supposed to do? Wait until the guy on top of him takes his gun out and puts a bullet in his head?
And
so
it's significant,
the suspect
Alex.
reached behind his back prior to charging, and that's very provocative.
You can go
on the videotape.
Go over to
he had
Beth.
a
What were you going to say?
0.06 blood alcohol level, 0.06, and he didn't have marijuana in his system. I don't know what the toxicology screen was for, but I don't recall hearing about any other drugs in his system. So it's not that he was under the influence of anything to make him act that way.
0.06 is, from at least that's, you can be charged with driving while impaired. I mean, you're almost at the level of driving while intoxicated. And people react differently to alcohol in their system. But, again, you can't escape that video. And why on earth is a guy charging the cop? And what is a cop supposed to do at night? Let himself get beat up and attacked. I think the prosecution is facing a really uphill battle here, and it wouldn't offend me if this guy was found not guilty.
Joseph, what's your take on this?
Tough being a cop nowadays. If you look at the force continuum where they're supposed to be, police work on what's called the escalation of force. And it involves a whole litany of things. And I know my esteemed colleagues are very familiar. Verbal commands, you do this, and you're non-compliant, then it escalates. Now it seems that we've had a rash of things that have escalated from "hey you" to people being shot, and it's when you have a case like this where this individual who literally charging the police, and he's not lumbering toward the cops, he's not walking toward them and being non-compliant, he is in a dead sprint. What is the police officer supposed to do at that point in time? Now, there's almost like a panicked event that you can hear. There's a lag in the tape, and then you hear About 7 sudden reports, another pause, and then more. And it's been alleged at this point that there were at least 12 rounds fired. Mm-hmm. I'd be very interested to know what would compel him to fire so many times. There's a lot of people that say, well, if someone came into my home, I would, I'm going to empty my weapon. Well, this isn't in a home, and we're talking about police officers here. They're taught how to fire a weapon. They're held to a different standard than a private citizen. So, if there were 12 rounds fired, that's going to be an issue that's going to come up in court. I'd have to concur with Alex, though. I think the prosecution is going to have a very difficult time fighting this battle and trying to win over the jury with this case when they're presented with the evidence that you see on the tape.
Mm-hmm. And do you concur with that, Beth?
Well, I do. I don't know the evidence real well. I know that Kerrick turned his dash cam off, although I think the audio you pick up comes from him, but he turned his dash cam off. And with the camera that we do see, where you see Jonathan Farrell, the victim, running toward the officers, that comes from another officer's camera. And then the fight and the shooting is off camera. It's off like to the right from the point of view of us looking at it. It's off to the right. And, you hear all those shots fired. Although when Kerrick, who testified, he was on the stand for a couple of days last week or earlier this week, when he testified, he said, he didn't think or when he talked about it right after it happened, he didn't think he fired as many times. But I understand that in these shootings, I don't know if it could be anybody, not just police officers shooting, that you don't perceive the number of shots you're firing under that stressful situation. He thought he fired like 5 or 6 times, not 12.
Very interesting. Okay, Alex, yesterday or the day before, former spokesman for Subway, Jared Fogle, I believe his name is, he pleaded guilty to Fogle. He pleaded guilty to child sex abuse charges. I mean, talk about the rise and fall of somebody. Wow. What did you think when you heard this?
Well, first of all, this may come as an absolute shock to everybody. I have never heard of this guy Fogle. Never once. I'm not kidding. I mean, I buy an occasional sandwich at Subway, but, when I was a kid, I was watching television, and a commercial came on. And I said, hey, Dad, why do they have commercials on TV? And he said, oh, that's in case you need to use the restroom, get something to eat. So I don't spend my time staring at commercials. And a Subway commercial wouldn't particularly leave an impression on my thinking. So I never heard of this guy. But having heard of him or not, this guy is obviously a very disturbed individual. I mean, he's arranging to have sex with kids. He's paying for people to bring kids for him to have sex. He had thousands of videos, thousands of pornographic images of young kids. I mean, this guy's living on a different planet. I mean, where do people like this come from? How does somebody develop that mentality? What happened to him in his life that he could have arrived at this awful station? Well, I don't know how it happened or why it happened, but it happened, and he's going to spend the next 12 years in jail because of this.
Yeah.
Is it because Beth Karas that he pleaded guilty that he's going to spend 12 years as opposed to maybe 30, 40 years?
Oh, yeah.
In your opinion?
He reached this plea agreement, I understand, shortly before court. I don't know if the judge has accepted the agreement yet.
Right.
Once the judge accepts it, and I believe he will, it's going to be somewhere between 5 and 12 and a half years. That was the agreement. But his exposure was more, and so maybe he's hoping that he'll actually do somewhere on the lower end. I don't know federal sentencing well, how much time you actually have to do. And if it's an indeterminate or a determinate sentence. Is it determinate sentence? Do you know, Alex?
No, those are determinate sentences. And you have to do, 98% of the sentencing. And the low end is 5 years, and the high end is 12 years if the judge accepts the recommendation of the prosecution or the defense. But the judge has a right to say, you know what, I'm not abiding by these particular sentencing arrangements, and the judge can give him up to 30 years.
Yeah,
and
okay, right.
When you're engaged in this behavior, you know what? You should be in jail for a substantial period of time. This is not acceptable behavior by any stretch of the imagination.
Yeah.
And Joseph Scott, your take on this?
I've just got a couple of points. I think, from my perspective, I don't know that I've ever seen a case that has such as this involving child pornography, where there is so much evidence and someone has received so little time. That indicates to me, at least, that relative to the wheeling and dealing that has been going on, that there are bigger fish to fry. I think that this is going to be very interesting to see develop. I hope that the media will stay on this. One more thing that's even as if it couldn't get more disturbing. I've read one report where Fogel had gone on an international tour for Subway, and there is some indication apparently that he procured children for sex potentially all around the world. I think that this could extend further than just the U.S. It would not surprise me in the least bit, particularly given his profile. You can look back to somebody like Gary Glitter, for instance. If Interpol was not involved in this at this point, conducting an investigation. And, a person's going to do what they're going to do if they have this kind of pathology going on. But Subway is really trying hard to distance themselves. They put out a couple of statements now. You look at this internationally, and they've essentially, given him means to go around the world and do this. And if they're from a civil perspective, I think this could get really, really nasty. I don't know. I'm probably speaking out of turn here because I'm not an attorney. But for me, that's just a couple of things that kind of struck me. I'm just overwhelmed by the amount of just this horrible, horrible evidence that's involved in this case, and he's getting so little time. So it's going to be very interesting from my perspective to see this thing develop.
Absolutely, and he won't be a friendly person there in the prisons, Alex Sanchez. Once you're labeled as that sexual predator, you will not be, you probably be in segregation, right?
Yeah, I don't think Mr. Fogel's going to have a very enjoyable time in prison. I mean, he was not designed to be in that environment. He looks like he's going to be victimized very quickly. The only thing going in his favor is that they know he's got money. That guy made $15 million.
Really?
Going around doing, he made millions. That's why he's paying each of at least 14 victims. He's paying them $100,000 each,
right?
Which they probably deserve more. But he's worth somewhere in the area of $15 million, and inmates know that. And so what happens is you go to a prison, and a gang comes up to you and they say, "Listen, you could either be miserable, and we're going to do what we want with you, and what they want to do with you is not very, not something that you would enjoy, or you could live." Right. A reasonably pleasant existence here. Just make sure you have family, relatives, or friends. Bring us money. Bring make sure my girlfriends get transportation to court. Make sure you take care of my wife outside. Make sure you do whatever we tell you to do. And as long as you do that, you're going to live okay. Generally rich people in jail are not doing so bad as long as they know how to spread the money around. That's the way it works.
It is crazy. And one last story, and I'll go to Joseph Scott, who's been covering this from the get-go. Oscar Pistorius, it seems like he's going to be getting out of jail, I believe, from what I read. Now, you covered this for HLN. What's your take on the Oscar Pistorius trial and him getting out and that whole case? What's your opinion?
Well, my understanding was, last I checked, that the judge has now stated that he will not be getting out just simply after 10 months, as was reported earlier. I think this came forward yesterday afternoon. I posted a link to this on my Facebook page. I think he's going to do more time. Right now, I don't know how much more time will be added on. We went to great lengths. I work at Jacksonville University in Jacksonville, Alabama, at the Center for Applied Forensics, and we actually reconstructed the scene and took photos of it. I posted a lot of those photos from the various angles in which posed that Pistorius fired from. I hate to use this terminology, but this is the term he used. He said that, at one time he said he was firing from his stumps, which I felt uncomfortable saying this in the air, but he had said it. Apparently this is common vernacular. He fired from his stumps. This means that he didn't have his prosthetics on. We fired from approximating the same level as he would have been on his stumps, and then fired from various levels when he has his prosthetics on. We ran lasers on it. I loaded these photos up again for those that hadn't seen them. You can see them on our, actually, Jacksonville State University. You can see those images. I put those up yesterday. Come over and visit us at Facebook. I'm just, the whole trial for me was something that was just so foreign because things were done completely different than they are in this country. I could not believe the amount of time and just the minutia that was piled on. We do things, we think, as investigators, we think things move slowly in our courts here. Over there, I would have, I would have run screaming into the night if I had been a part of that case. It just took so long for the whole thing to kind of play itself out. A lot of evidence here really left me scratching my head, particularly the way the scene was processed.
Can I ask you about that trial and about the shots being fired through the door? Because I thought that the state or the government wasn't really prepared. But didn't their experts tell them right on the eve of trial that the defense theory was right?
Yeah, it was kind of the damnedest thing
that he had his legs on, and that was the premeditation. He took the time to put his legs on and go down the hall and shoot through it. Yeah, exactly. And and beforehand, he had been stating that he was in fear for his life. He was laying in bed. He didn't have his prosthetics on. We got several different stories along the way. And, of course, he's living in this compound in South Africa that's got a 12-foot-high wall around it with concertina wire. He has security. Sometimes he doesn't. But he's got, the windows are partially barred, I think, in a certain place, and the room's up on the second floor. But yet he thought that someone had broken into his house and was in his bathroom. It was really hard for me to swallow. We never could get a real good handle on the physical evidence. The autopsy report was not released to us at the time, but as it turned out, she had passing through the door. When the wood splintered, it went into her and created all these horrible injuries. Very, very messy scene. I was amazed at how much latitude they gave this man in court. And I remember talking to Vinnie Politan about this when we were doing the case, and it was brought up to us that he has such status in that country. He is so, held in such high esteem that they really treaded very lightly in this case with him, as opposed to someone else that they may have been more heavy-handed with. Mm-hmm.
So,
Alex Sanchez, your take 1 year later on Oscar Pistorius.
I think the Oscar Pistorius story just reveals what an absolutely pathetic and broken criminal justice system must exist in South Africa. Now, Oscar Pistorius, he may be some wonderful hero over there in South Africa, but most people here in the United States barely heard of him. And when this trial was going on, and he was coming in court, and he was crying, and he was vomiting in court, and he was pulling all these stunts, most Americans were looking at him and saying, this guy's an absolute fraud. His story is completely preposterous. He had prior incidents of waving guns outside of cars and shooting like crazy. Prior girlfriends came in and testified that he had, that he had a horrible, temper tantrums. There wasn't any doubt in my mind that this guy went on some type of crazy rage because he had some argument with his girlfriend, and he snapped, and he couldn't control himself, and he was just going to, mow down anybody in his path, including his girlfriend. And because of his fame, just like Joe said, because of his fame, he walked into court, and everybody was kowtowing to him, Mr. Pistorius, and granting him incredible leeway, finding him not guilty of the most serious charges. And now he's on the verge of being paroled. That's a broken system. That's a system that idolizes famous people. And
Beth Karas, they wanted to show this live to show that they do things right, quote, in South Africa. What was your take watching that trial 1 year ago?
Well, I didn't watch every minute of it, but I did watch some of it, and I think that there were some restrictions on the camera, if I recall properly. Pistorius, I think maybe they weren't allowed to shoot him when he was sobbing on the stand. We heard him but didn't see him. I seem to recall that, which I thought wasn't fair. Since it's he's the defendant, but I do agree with what everybody else is saying about the system there, and that the judge, who was known to be kind of tough, big on women's rights, and everybody thought that she'd be kind of tough on him because he's a misogynist, arguably, and he clearly knew she was in the bathroom. She locked herself in the bathroom. They were having a fight, and he fired through the door. I mean, what did he think was going to happen? I think he just has a real, to put it lightly, anger management issues. This is a guy who never should have a gun. He's had issues with guns in the past, firing from a car, pulling a gun out in a restaurant, and other things. I'm just recalling from memory, so correct me if I'm off on some of these facts here. So, I was surprised that he didn't get a more severe conviction, a higher charge.
And what did you think of the just having a judge as opposed to a trial, a jury? A jury, yes.
Well, that's the system there. I mean, a lot of the world doesn't have juries the way we do. I mean, it's right. I have friends who are judges in Germany, and they do have a couple of jurors, but they're not just anybody from the community, and there's just a couple who sit and help them go through the facts, and it's just very different. So, I mean, people say we have the best system in the world. I don't know. It's not infallible, but it's pretty good.
That is an interesting question. Do we have the best system in the world? Alex Sanchez, let me get your take on that.
Hey, I think we do have the best system in the world. I'm a very big proponent of the jury system. Every time there's a jury renders a bad verdict, like in the O.J. Simpson case or some other case, people talk about how awful the jury system is. But what's worse than a jury system is not having a jury system and having judges alone make determinations as to whether or not you're guilty. And why is that dangerous? Because judges are appointed by politicians. Yep. And I don't want judges appointed by politicians who have an agenda to come in and say, well, we got to make sure everybody gets convicted. I don't want to see that happen. That does happen in minor cases, like, if you go to the Department of Motor Vehicles and you're fighting traffic tickets, these are judges that are appointed by political figures. And they almost find everybody guilty. Well, if you were to magnify that in the criminal justice system, we'd have like way, way more people found guilty. And you know what? Some of those people found guilty are innocent. And I don't want to see that occur. I don't want to see the politicalization of the justice system. I'd rather have the people make the ultimate determination.
Joseph, your thoughts on the way we do things here in America?
Hey man, I got to concur. I'm a Southerner, and proudly, and not only a Southerner, but I'm from Louisiana by birth and from New Orleans. And I look at it. People point the finger at Chicago as being a corrupt place, and we could give Chicago a lesson. Trust me. Just because, your daddy plays golf with somebody or you go to church with somebody and that guy happens to be the judge, and I don't want to, try to gentrify this thing and make it more simplistic than it is, but let's face facts. If you're in a position of power like that and you have it concentrated with one man that's wearing the robe and sitting up there, your chances of receiving justice are slim. Your odds increase exponentially if you've got 12 members of the jury. Hopefully they're a jury of your peers, however we define that. I don't really know sometimes, but I'd really take my odds, take my chances with a jury, and I think that we do have the best system in the United States. The best system in the world we have here in the United States. Of course, I've got a very limited scope. This is the only system I've ever known, but I'm very satisfied with it.
Okay, let's give everybody a chance to plug their respective items. Let's start with you, Joseph Scott. Morgan, anything you want to plug tonight?
Yeah, sure. First off, I'd like to give a big shout-out to Sarah and Maddie and Pager.
Yes.
I'd like to mention, our big supporters that we have on Facebook. I'd like to mention my memoir, Blood Beneath. And if you'll check out my Facebook, there's a sizzle reel that has been created for a show that we're pitching with the executive producer for Project Runway called Identity Unknown. I put the sizzle reel up. I'd love for everybody to see it. There's over 10,000 unidentified bodies at any point in time out there around our country, and our goal with this program is to try to get these bodies identified. It's the first time this has ever been attempted. We've got great tools at our disposal in areas of DNA and anthropology and odontology and all that sort of thing. We want to bring those resources to bear. So if people could just check it out and let me know what you think. Sizzle Reel is up on my Facebook. It's just Joseph Scott Morgan.
Okay, Alex Sanchez, anything you want to plug tonight?
I just want to say thank you for inviting me on the show, and to be on a show with somebody like Joe and Beth. I mean, I'm honored because these are people that are very accomplished in their field, and it's just great speaking to them and participating in this discussion. I am going to be on the Nancy Grace Show on August 27th, Thursday, for anybody that would like to watch the show, and we're going to be talking about some particularly interesting crimes, although I can't reveal what we're talking about, but it's really going to be good. And I'm expected to be on Legal View with Ashley Banfield possibly next week. The dates are not clear yet because of the election process that's going on. There's a lot of disruption in scheduling there. My website is alexandersanchez.com. I invite listeners to take a look. And, of course, if you ever need a criminal defense attorney, call Alex.
Right. Let's go over to the icon, the dean of trial, and she's been doing this for many decades and an excellent job. Beth Karas, as always, you give the best insight as anyone in the courtroom, and as far as this is concerned, you are probably one of the best journalists I've ever watched in American history. So I just want to say that on the record. And let's tell everybody about your website.
Well, thank you very much, Jordan. I have a website. It's a subscription site called KarasOnCrime.com, and it's $5.99 a month. I launched it last year to cover Jodi Arias's penalty phase retrial, where I was in the courtroom logging, and I had documents and photos, and I shot a video every night analyzing the day's testimony and answering questions that were submitted in writing. So I'm continuing the site, although, there's no trial going on right now that I'm following gavel to gavel, but I continue to do podcasts. I'm doing a podcast tomorrow with a friend who was one of the executive producers of Law & Order SVU. And he also has written some crime thriller novels. And so we're going to be talking about what inspires him, and he used to work with me at Court TV as a producer. And we're going to go behind the scenes at SVU. But I also primarily I'm in the true crime world in my podcast, and I continue to shoot videos. And I'm also now shooting educational videos. I've done one recently about how the law has changed and covering high-profile trials, and I started with the Sam Shepard trial from 1954. F. Lee Bailey got it reversed in 1966, and the U.S. Supreme Court changed the rules of how cases are covered, and in high-profile cases, rather, for judges, like saying change the venue and, issue gag orders and kick out reporters who are disruptive and sequester the jury if necessary, things we take for granted. There were 20 reporters sitting in the well of the courtroom in the Sam Shepard trial, sitting right behind the counsel table in the well of the courtroom. Anyway, so I gave a talk on Ernesto Miranda, the case that the Miranda warnings come out of. So I have more in store. So I'm educating my members on sort of interesting legal history stories and cases, but following and analyzing cases that are in the news now. And I'm going to relaunch the site soon. We've just had some issues getting it restarted, and there'll be a book corner on it too. So I'm interested in interviewing authors. I already have some podcasts with authors. Maybe Joe will talk to me about his book.
Hey,
that
sounds
great.
And I have more stuff in the works regarding television, but I'm not at liberty to discuss it right now. So we'll talk about it when I can.
Absolutely, and this was a great show, and I want to thank Alex Sanchez, Joseph Scott, and of course you, Beth Karas, for joining us tonight. Have a great weekend to all.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you, Jordan. Take care.
Thank
you, Beth, Alex.
Thanks, Jordan.
Have a good night, everybody.
Bye-bye.